Good evening and welcome to Interface Live on SABC3. The Parliamentary Portfolio Committee on Arts and Culture is discussing reviewing the language bill following public hearings which were held in January. Academics, language experts and NGOs have raised concerns regarding the delay in enacting the bill. But most notably, they are worried that the bill as it stands will not address the challenge of making all languages equal. One of the major challenges is to ensure that government services are available in all indigenous languages. Now, please let's welcome our guests, the Director General of the Department of Arts and Culture, Sibusiso Xaba, Angie Netsieni, Acting Executive Head of Languages at the Pan-South African Language Board, and in Cape Town, Dr. Neville Alexander, former Director of the Project for the Study of Alternative Education at the University of Cape Town. Now, please, you may join this discussion by sending us your comments to 33726. That's 33726 pertaining to these concerns. Lady, gentlemen, good evening, welcome, thank you for your time.
Good evening.
DG, if I may start off with you, concerns about the bill not addressing the challenges of making all South African languages equal. Is this a legitimate concern?
Well, there is legitimacy to the concern. Maybe the bill is not even meant to do exactly that. The point with the languages bill is to create an environment where people can access services with a language that they can understand. And that is what the bill tries to do. It's deliberately focused on doing that because the bill tries to get government departments to commit to the use of particular language for the purposes of government business. At the same time, being able to give guidelines how people can claim languages if they use languages which government does not use.
Well, we're talking about a bill you're addressing the equality of languages, and if it's not meant by the bill to address these inequalities of languages, what is then addressing it?
Well, there are many things which are addressing equality of languages. If you look at the Constitution says a couple of things. One, it says that government must be through legislative and other measures address equality of bill. We've got to treat all languages. There's got to be parity of esteem, and there's got to be equality. Languages have got to be used in an equitable manner. Now, those things are done in a variety of ways. There is development of languages, which is happening in South Africa. Perhaps it's happening slow, perhaps it's not happening adequately, but it is happening.
Yeah, let's address some of those concerns later on. But yes, some legitimacy in the concern. And well, that's purely your mandate, isn't it, Pansal, by really ensuring that the equality factor within languages do feature significantly. That implicates Pansal to an extent.
Yes, it does. Our role as a Pansal is to facilitate the development of languages.
Granted.
Through promotion, which also entails awareness raising. And going back to the Constitution and the bill as it stands, we've got issues as PENSALP in that the Constitution pronounces that there are 11 official languages, and 6.2 says that recognizing that the indigenous languages have been marginalized, so government needs to take positive steps in developing and ensuring that these languages are used and that their status.
Well, seemingly that'll be coming through the draft, it seems. But what, according to Pansal, Ms. Netsieni, what constitutes the equaling of all 11, official languages, that is?
It is not really equaling. It is equitable. That's the term that is used. What this means is that, the 11 official languages need, especially the marginalized language, former marginalized languages, need to be given space to operate just like, the fully developed languages like English and Afrikaans. And if the bill talks about only 3 languages, this is where we have an issue in that with the 3 languages, what happens to the rest of the other languages? How are they going to be allowed that space for use, and how will their status be raised?
Right, let's come back to some of those issues you've touched on and go back to Cape Town. Dr. Alexander, from what we've heard being said by the two guests previously now, is this possible? Is it really feasible, though, to look at it and say, well, the equaling out or to find equitable grounds for the levelling out of the languages, their representation within the bill? Is there a good argument for that based on that, what you've heard?
Yes, thank you. I think let me start by just saying that I thought I was going to be discussing the relationship between language and economic productivity. But I'm quite happy to discuss the bill. It's only that I think it's got to be made very clear that what this discussion is really about. Let's leave aside the bill for the moment. This is about the consolidation of a democratic system in South Africa. If ordinary people are going to be part and parcel of decision-making in those areas of life which affect them, and more particularly those who are poor in the rural and the urban areas, if they're going to be part and parcel of decision-making, it's got to happen in languages that they understand, that they know. And statistically, we know that under 50% of South Africans actually know English in such a way as to empower themselves. That's the first point. The second point, and I want to state this very clearly, this particular language bill as it stands at the moment, inadequate, flawed, deeply flawed, this language bill has got a history. When I was part and parcel of the drawing up of the original language bill in 2002, 2003, that bill was costed. We showed through an economic costing exercise that it was possible within 3 years or within 10 years, we had different time frames, to rule this country, to govern this country in such a way that all 11 languages would be able to be used. The cabinet eventually put that aside and thought that it was impracticable, and that gave, quite unconstitutionally, by the way, asked the department to find other measures. So the present bill is an attempt to comply with a court order which was issued about 2 years ago, because it was felt by the person Mr. Cornelius Lourens, who brought the court order, who brought this class action against the department. It was felt that the department had dilly-dallied for too long. In other words, 15 years.
Yep. Dr. Alexander,
Later.
sorry. Yes, some of the issues that you're touching on now, I would like to explore later on, particularly with regards to the litigation that is pending. But you've made profound statements again with regards to the draft or the bill being flawed. Let's get some response from government, and please, Pansalp too.
The bill is flawed. Well, we don't believe that the bill is flawed. It's about what such a law can do and what can be achieved through other means. What the bill tries to do is to give certainty on what can one expect when you go to a government department. What service can you be expected to be served in? I mean, what language can you be expected to be served in? Under ideal circumstances, yes, all the government departments should be using all 11 official languages as language of business. Is that practical? We don't believe so. From a cost point of view, from a development point of view, from a capacity point of view, in this country we simply do not have sufficient numbers of language practitioners to be able to do that overnight.
What?
Yes, over time, that is what we would like to achieve.
Official response from government. Now, given that Dr. Alexander has got a foot to stand on, a leg to stand on rather, and there's merit in his argument, why has Pansalp not picked up that flaw?
We have, actually, in our submission. This is where we are proposing that, much as we speak about the 11 languages, it's 6 languages on a rotational basis. And this does not really mean that you publish everything in 11 languages. In some instances, you respond per request.
But isn't that exactly what you're referring to earlier on? If you not do it in all 11 languages, then some of those will be feeling marginalized. 10 seconds. You don't have everything in the 11 languages.
Like, for instance, in different provinces, you'll find that it is not all the 11 languages that are used. You know, it depends on the surveys that are there per province. You come to provinces like Gauteng, for instance. You identify particular situations where certain languages will be used on a rotational basis, and there are instances where you can't avoid it. You just have to make means to make sure that everybody who speaks a particular language within the 11 languages gets the service.
Thank you, Ms. Angela from Pansalp. And again, apologies, Dr. Alexander. We will, however, be talking about some of the brief that we've gotten previously on what we will be discussing. That is the languages versus the economic viability. That's one of the points we'll be looking at right after the break. Please don't go away. Welcome back to Interface Live on SABC3. The Language Bill seeks to eliminate the marginalization of indigenous languages as well as sign language. The bill also aims to ensure that the entrenchment of language equity and language rights are pursued in such a way that both national unity and democracy are promoted. As things stand, currently English is used in almost all official communication, and yet only 8% of the population of this country are mother tongue speakers of the English language. Now, given that, and we're going to be having a graph shortly, there we have it, ma'am. I shudder to think if it's exactly that being represented by the speakers of the languages, those official 11 languages in this country, I think being led by isiZulu, closely followed by isiXhosa, and then Afrikaans, and there we go on, English closely tied with some of the others there. If that would come to its right, then we can talk of, and given the masses and the numbers, etc., then the point that was raised earlier on by the economic implication or its impact on that would really give us new heights to go and explore. Now, where do we stand with Pansalp in leveling out the equitable approach of that what we see on the screen?
As Pansalp, you know, our focus is not really on any particular African language, but our bias is more towards all the African languages.
Given the 11, sorry, I have to interrupt you, because given the official 11 languages there, because there's the perception amongst the broader communities who deal directly with the language discourse and say, well, Pansalp really is a body without any bite for that matter.
Well, it's unfortunate that we couldn't take people, you know, to court for linguistic rights violations. And where we stand now as Pansalp is that we actually need a tribunal, which is a body that would be able to take people to court, you know, and follow up on those cases. And the reason why we are proposing that is because of the funding that we get. We don't think we'll be in a position to, you know, do our monitoring and also be taking people to court and following up those court cases. It will be very expensive for us.
Is there an argument to be made, Dr. Alexander, that really legitimacy can be given to the languages in that particular order, or is it a matter of standard? Because in your view, if memory serves, the bill, if not amended, will continue to make English and Afrikaans the dominant languages in government and public life, etc. So what needs really to change this?
Well, you know, I'm flying blind. I can't see you people. I can't see the graph that you've got on the screen. But I can imagine what it is. And I also think, you know, that we've got to be really quite serious about this discussion. We're pretending that the people out there actually know what we're talking about. Most of them have never read the bill. They've probably seen a few references here and there. And I think it's really important to make it terribly clear to people that it's about their democratic right to use the language or language of their choice in communicating with the state, first of all. And secondly, I think it's also important to state very clearly that there are solutions to all these problems. I agree with Mr. Klaba. It's not overnight. These things have to be phased in, but you've got to invest in it. As I always say, you know, if you live in a desert country, you invest in boreholes, desalination plants, and so on. If you live in a multilingual country, you must invest in technology that facilitates communication. We proposed a translation and interpreting service for South Africa, a telephonic interpreting service, which would simplify all these issues of communication if it had been phased in 10 years ago when we started the whole process. That's just one example. What I'm getting at, answering your question directly, it's not only feasible, it's imperative. We have to do it if we're serious about democracy. Otherwise, the only people who gain from this particular approach that is being adopted by the department at the moment are those who are proficient in English, and that's a very small proportion of population, black, white, green, or yellow. It's a very small proportion of the population. It's a class issue. We're discriminating against working class people, against poor people in urban and rural areas by insisting on the approach that the department has taken.
Dr. Alexander, I'd like to come back to the issue of standardization of a language and the impact thereof, particularly on the tertiary level, intellectual level, because there's some noises made on that also pertaining to some of the official languages. But let's raise the other important issue that you've just touched on, and that is, DG, on do we really as a public know what we're talking about? I mean, how broad? Yes, you've had your public hearings in January. Some of the meetings can attest to that, but what was the critical mass of those people attending those, and really how far was your scope, your sample size?
Look, I think we had, in Parliament, there were public hearings over 2 days. They were just done in the Parliament, unfortunately, because of the time frames and because of the time that it happened. However, I think that we had a good response from language practitioners. Now, those were experts, they were people with an interest in the subject. I do think that this is a broader discussion that needs to happen in the country, because I think we've got to be clear about this. It's not just about everybody being able to speak their language. The Constitution also speaks about multilingualism, which means that in an ideal situation, all of us should be able to speak all 11 languages. And I think that's the real ideal that we are talking about. However, it's going to take us time to get there, and I believe that we've got to take those pragmatic steps to make services available to people, for people to be able to use their language in a way that helps them to be productive, including
in terms of monitoring and regulation thereof. I mean, is it Pansalb's feeling that the people are generally well informed?
People are not well informed. I mean, if you look at the bill now as it stands, it's only available in English. And I think if you look at the people who made inputs and comments, who made submissions, they are mainly from the English and Afrikaans communities. What's happening to the majority of the people? Do they understand about this bill? Do they know about it? Had it been communicated in their respective languages, one thing sure would be having better, participation from the other groups as well. And it's not happening.
Dr. Alexander, what would be the ideal solution with regards to getting the people informed with regards to the content in layman's terms regarding the bill?
Well, I do think that the department, first of all, the department is under time pressure, as the DG has just said. They've got to have this thing ready by the 16th or the latest, the 15th of March, because that's what the court order set that date. And I can assure you that they're going to be taken back to court because they're not complying with the court order as the thing stands at the moment. That's the first point. The second point is I think that the department really has to take the entire language dispensation in the country, including PANSALB, including the Department of the National Language Service, take the entire national language dispensation in the country in review over a period of a year or two so that we can really come to terms with the best ways. I agree with the DG. We've got to be pragmatic, but we have to have firm principles within which we can be pragmatic. Otherwise, we're just going to sell out the poor people once again.
Dr. Nebel Alexander coming live from Cape Town. Of course, you may join in the discussion. We're talking about matters languages. And please, some of those concerns raised earlier, you can SMS your view to 33726. We'll be back right after the breakdown. Go away. Welcome back to Interface Live on SABC3. Continuing the discussion on the language bill that's currently in action. Just before we went for the break, DG, the concerns were raised, and of course Dr. Neville Alexander in Cape Town said that you've got to get your act together at least by the 15th, because a court hearing date has been set on the 16th, particularly with the issue around subsection, at least section, is that section 6, subsection 4, or vice versa, of the whole matter concerned. But just in layman's terms, so we all understand it, that is the right of, let's say, provincial powers, for argument's sake, have to roll out the languages, and particularly demographically the language that comes into play within a region where you can, instead of taking all 11 languages, which is really impractical in a lot of respects, that really government has failed to do. Let's take, for argument's sake, let's take the Western Cape, that I'm known to. We have the Afrikaans English and isiXhosa as an African language. So that is exactly what the Act says, and that really government has failed to roll out successfully. Well,
look, the Constitution places a responsibility on government to do a number of things. One is to legislate. Yes, they are legislative measures, and those legislative measures are both national as well as provincial governments. Some provincial governments have legislated, like the Western Cape, like Limpopo. Some have got language policies and not that into law, and we are now doing the national government legislation. But I also want to, I think it's important that we note that there are other measures that are taking place. There's development of languages, there's the writing of lexicographies and those kinds of technical things around languages. There's the writing of dictionaries in indigenous languages. There are bursaries which we give as a department to develop language practitioners. Interestingly, somebody from the public has just SMS'd through a message saying exactly that we are creating that capacity, and we've got to continue doing those things. The law itself, useful as it is, will not be sufficient. It is one of the ingredients that we
Dr. Alexander, just quickly from this matter to the other, a couple of years ago you were of strong mind that instead of looking at the collective as dealing with all 11 languages, let's package that to something like either 6 or 4 and work from that as a base. What is the current status of that approach?
Well, it's one approach. And as I said, in order to discuss this particular issue sensibly, one needs to have much, much more background than we're able to give in a few minutes. The idea was that those languages that are mutually intelligible to a very high degree, for example, isiXhosa and isiZulu, could be used in a rotational way, such that particular documents would be available in isiZulu at the national level and others in isiXhosa, etc., and that this would rotate in a certain systematic way. That was, to some extent, practiced actually in Parliament and elsewhere, but it was not systematically done, and in fact, at the moment, I think it's dormant. What I would like to say, though, is that I think, for example, this very kind of discussion, obviously much longer time should be devoted to it, needs to take place in all the African languages, in Umhlobo Wenene, in Ukosi, in Letsedi, in all the other major radio stations, as well as on TV in SABC1, SABC2,
Dr. Alexander,
and so on.
I'm sure our producer is taking heed of that very important concern that you're raising and the need of that. Unfortunately, our time has run out. I just want to get the closing arguments also from my two guests here, really giving each 30 seconds in taking this forward. We didn't even come to matters education and, of course, the standardization of the languages, but perhaps that at the next stage. Coming from Pansalp, protection can be enjoyed from Pansalp, not a dead horse really, but it's being ridden?
What I would say at this moment is that we encourage all provinces to develop their language policies, municipalities, and all government role players, actually, to start developing those language policies so that when language development takes place, it takes place within the developed language policies that later could be adopted as language acts.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Ms. Ncheni from Pansalp Government. I'm unfortunately going to have to leave it there. DG, thank you very much for your time and for being so understanding. That's it for tonight. Please join us again next week for yet another current affairs debate. And remember to email us interfaceon3@sabc.coza or catch us on Facebook. For your views on this program, please, next week, please note that we'll discuss gender equity and the challenges facing the Department of Women, Children and People with Disabilities. The Deputy Minister, Henrietta Bogopane Zulu, will join us for the discussion. So, Please tune in then. From the whole team and myself, Jerome Topley, it's good night and enjoy the rest of SABC3's company.